Hi, I'm Helen and welcome to Stories from the Art Room. Today I'm in the lovely village of Gretelton where there's an intriguingly named cafe called the Velvateen Luncheon Club, and here is the owner Kirstine. So Kirstine, what was it that drew you to the Velvateen Rabbit as a little story to name your cafe?
Well, Helen, the Velvateen Rabbit was always my favourite story as a child, and it's about a rabbit, a toy rabbit that was brought to life by the love of a little boy. So there's a toy rabbit who was given to a little boy, and it's based around a book. And the book is by Marjorie Williams. We have loads of these in the cafe, and the little boy is given a rabbit for a present, and he loves the rabbit. He loves him to pieces and takes him everywhere, and he holds him and he goes on all sorts of adventures. But the rabbit realises he isn't real when he comes across some actual live rabbits. And he desperately wants to be real. The little boy unfortunately comes down with scarlet fever, which you don't hear much about anymore, but he's very, very ill, and they had to take all of his toys away and get rid of them and burn them. So the little rabbit is tucked away into a plastic bag, a sack to be disposed of, and he's very, very sad, and as his tears drop onto the ground, a flower comes up, and the magical fairy from the nursery grants his wish to become real, and he can go and join the rabbits in the forest that he met. And it was this idea that if you love something so very much, you can become real, which is where I'd always loved that, and everybody secretly believes that their teddies come to life when they're not watching, which I still do.
And of course you've got a little girl now, Charlotte,
yes,
that you're going to be able
telling stories too, all about the Velvateen Rabbit and all about her toys that come to life, and how there's nursery magic. So I think everybody needs to believe in a little bit of magic.
Definitely do, yes. And of course it's quite magical down here in the downstairs basement to this really old building. It's very quirky, and,
yes,
and where it's furnished with really interesting sort of what would you say, shabby chic.
I think yes, it's very much a make do and mend. We always found that furniture that's already been sat in, a little bit like the rabbit, if you've already sat in it, it's a lot more comfortable. It's not as new because somebody else's bottom has made it just right. A little bit like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Somebody else has made it just right, and it's all very, very comfortable and a little bit worn, but it's loved. And it brings a bit of a feeling of being maybe in your aunt's parlour, having afternoon tea, and comfort and warmth. And there's something about old furniture that has that new furniture doesn't necessarily. So we furnished all of our cafe with old furniture and knickknacks and other bits and bobs that mean something to us. They might not mean something to anybody else, but they all mean something to us.
Yeah.
It tells our story.
Gives a very nice atmosphere here.
Yeah.
And of course the nice crockery as well is more, I don't know, of a gentler time, and yeah, it certainly brings back memories for me, being that much older, of lots of cakes by the sea and things like that. Although we're not near the sea here, but it is near Gretelton has a lovely river through it, and just beyond where the Velvateen Rabbit is, there's a picnic area next to the river, which gets really packed.
It does. You can watch the ducks coming and going, and it's a beautiful river. It's a River Leven, I believe, that runs through the middle, and we're only a couple of metres away from it, and it's absolutely fantastic to sit and watch, and you can walk all the way along it. It runs all the way through parts of North Yorkshire, and it comes down to Teesside, but it's a beautiful little, it's more stream-like by the time it gets to here, than it is river-like.
Yes,
It's still very, very beautiful and very peaceful.
It can be really fast flowing if you get lots of rain, can't it?
Or it doesn't, it swells quite dramatically.
The ducks sort of hang on and whoosh down it, don't they?
It's absolutely beautiful. All the children come out during the summer and they play with the fishing nets and they paddle in the river and they go down and they feed the ducks, and it's really, really lovely during the summer. But it's sort of Great Hayton's very much like that in a bit of a bygone era, where people come down and life's a little bit slower, and it's a little bit gentler, and there isn't so much technology here. The Wi-Fi is terrible, but it's all about a slower pace of life, which is a little bit away from what we're all used to now, which is kind of where I remember my childhood, at afternoon tea with grandma and on a Sunday, and she would bake all the cakes, and all of my family are bakers, and my partner, who we set up the business together, all of his family were bakers. He was taught to bake by his grandma, and he has lovely memories of baking cakes and making dinners, and his grandma taught him everything.
Well, I've eaten some of Ian's dinners here. They were absolutely delicious, and I've always enjoyed the cakes, particularly scones. Look at this. I can't resist a good scone. And
with jam and cream.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, it's a bit of a blast to the past, but it's a bit of a warm hug, I like to think of, to remind you that you don't have to live everything 1,000 miles a minute.
No, or perfect.
No, not everything needs to be perfect, and very much like the Velvateen rabbit, when you're a little bit dog-eared and a little bit rough in patches, it's okay because you've actually lived. And there's some days I'm very rough in patches, and I think everybody is.
Everybody is. Yes.
Just a little bit rough around the edges, and it's okay. It's okay not to be completely perfect, and to be sparkly and shiny and brand new, and it's all right to have lived a little bit and to have seen a few things, and they're the stories that are the best. And we meet some fantastic people who come in who have the greatest stories about what they've done and people they've met and places they've been, and it's lovely to listen to them. And that's how you make friends, and that's where your life becomes really rich and interesting, I think, when you get to meet people like that who are a little bit worn around the edges, and they've been places and seen things and done stuff, and they've got all the stories to tell, and they pass them on to you, and then you can retell them in your own way, and I think that's really lovely. And it's a fantastic industry to work in, because you get to meet all sorts of people, and we were lucky enough to go and have afternoon tea at the Palace, because we'd been out during the pandemic meeting people, which was really, really lovely. We were invited to see the Queen.
Saw Charles.
And we saw Charles.
Yes.
Queen wasn't there; she was very, very poorly. But we saw Charles and Camilla, and it was very, very special for us, because you always see the palace from the outside, you never get to see it from the inside, so it was a bit of a moment where we were allowed in, and we got to have afternoon tea. It was very, very lovely.
Great.
But just from us going out and speaking to people when everyone was locked up at home, and talking to people and delivering bread and delivering cakes, we didn't think it was very important at the time, but apparently it was.
I think so, absolutely. You stayed open and we could come and get takeaways. I remember getting boxes of veggies and things like that from you. And
we did. We did all
good.
sorts of things, and it was just to keep talking to people, really, because it's what we do.
Very isolating, wasn't it?
It was, and I think people forget that you need people to talk to, and as much as we might just deliver food sometimes, we are a little bit of everything. I mean, I've worked in hospitality for years, mostly while I was doing degrees and other more interesting things that I never got around to finishing. But we're all about, we have a range of knowledge. The guys who work in hospitality, we're shoulders to cry on, and we're local maps, and
also you're impromptu gallery. There's quite a lot of my artwork in the Velvateen Rabbit, and it's a bit cheeky on my part, but what it means is that people get to see quite a lot of the stuff that I've got in my home that it gets too much after a while, because you can put things out to galleries and then it all comes back in again and you think, where are you going to put it? So it's great. Kirstine gets to
it's lovely because there's loads of people who stop and look. And we have there's a lovely selection upstairs of some rabbits all having afternoon tea, and there's loads of people who've stopped and asked. But
enjoy doing them actually, just for a bit of fun, really.
I think it's not always sometimes the galleries can be a bit elitist, whereas then everybody's welcome in a coffee shop. And everyone comes to have a stop and a look and read the stories, because they've all got a little story to them, and they're all cheeky little rabbits having afternoon tea and cakes, and people absolutely love them, and they're mixed media as well, and they're really very touchable, and they're just fantastic to sit and watch, and you notice new bits every time, and that's kind of how we wanted it to be in here. It's we move things around so it changes a little bit very subtly, so there's something new to look at, or there's new pictures or little knickknacks, and we love local artists and people who pop in.
Quite a few people.
And we've had this lovely little chap. He was made for us by a local artist, and he's all handmade, and she made all the bits for him. But again, there's some fantastic people that you might not stumble across. And you happen to wander into a cafe, and there's some things, and you think, oh wow. And then you
do
wandering for them.
Yeah, you do your musical evenings as well, don't you?
So we love live music, because it's again, for me, it was all about the senses, so touch and taste, and it all evokes memories, and it sort of gets all of your mind working, and it's not just about coming out for a quick bite to eat. So we incorporated live music into what we do as well, and we've got a lovely artist called Elaine Palmer, and she does a lot of our work with us, but she has these beautiful songs with beautiful lyrics.
What do you mean? She does these? Who did this?
Oh, that one. They're absolutely stunning, aren't they?
Yeah, really good.
But it's all about the senses for us. So it was all about taste and touch and smell and feel, and you bring all of it together, and it creates an atmosphere that is completely unique, we like to think. I mean, it might not be. It might be all.
No, Anyway, is there something in particular that you'd like to showcase that Ian's done? Because of course Ian's the driving force as well down up in the kitchen. It's not below here. It's on show here.
It's up high. Everything we do is on show. So Ian has been a bit of a powerhouse for the past 22 years.
Wow.
Chefing in and around the northeast of England, and he does some fantastic breakfast dishes, and he's well renowned for his scrambled eggs. I don't know what he does with them.
Absolutely, yes.
But he does make them some of the tastiest scrambled eggs in the world. I can't cook scrambled eggs, but I'm not in charge of them, so it's absolutely fine.
I can't cook scones either. I'm always fiddling with the recipe, and they're always going like biscuits I'm terrible at scrambled eggs. I'm a bit of a microwave fan, and much to people's horror, but Ian's scrambled eggs are absolutely delightful, and he does get a lot of comments about them. Right.
And we do have a beautiful dish which we call gypsy eggs, which has black pudding with the poached eggs, and it's absolutely divine on sourdough toast. But we do quite a lot of breakfast, and we use all local eggs from a local farm, so they're all free range eggs too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they've got beautiful yolks. But yeah, his scrambled eggs are absolutely ace. I would definitely recommend those.
Right, reasonably.
He's a jackalope. So he was rescued from a pub where they used to throw darts into him. And it's made up of various different animal parts. It's a bit grim actually.
Yeah.
But it sort of fuels my weird interest in taxidermy. So he's part rabbit, part something else. I think he's got a little bit of deer in him, and there's something else in there. And usually there's another one that's not so far away from here, that has duck's feet. And they're these mythical creatures a little bit like the haggis story. Have you heard the haggis story?
No.
Oh, okay. I'll tell you about the haggis story. So the mythical creatures that roam the Yorkshire moors, and you eat them, jackalopes apparently, but you have to catch them. But they're mythical creatures. They only come out at certain times of the night, usually in a full moon. So my family are all Scottish, and we'd gone up to Aberdeen for some reason or other. I can't remember why. And I remember we'd got to the airport, and I must have been quite young. I must have been about 6. And there was this Scottish chap, and he was telling me about the haggis. And apparently haggis run round hills. They've got one set of legs, they're longer than the other set of legs.
They sound like hares.
A little bit.
Yeah.
And they run round these hills, but they can only run a certain way around. And the haggis catchers honk a great big horn, and it startles the haggis. And because their legs are longer on one side and shorter on the other, they all turn around the wrong way and then fall down the hill, and they catch them at the bottom with big nets. It was this sort of weird folk story. So you can tell I quite like stories. These weird folk stories that come down, and I've carried that with me since I was 6.
Brilliant! Yeah.
But I was telling you about first footing. So Grandad Stephen, who's my mother's father, so we used to do first footing. We still do it. We do it. So a dark-haired man has to leave the house just before midnight on.
Christmas Eve?
Is it New Year's Eve?
Yeah.
And you have to take with you salt, matches, and coal, so that I don't know what the salt's for, but you always have heat and something else. But they're kicked out, essentially. You have to go out, because if you go out before somebody's come in, it takes all of the good luck with you. And it's all gone. It's just disappeared. Grandpa, being dark-haired as he was, towards the end he didn't have any hair, so it made a difference. But it's the same with Ian, because Ian's got dark hair, so you have to kick him out before midnight, so he doesn't take all the good luck with him if he steps outside, and there'd be holy hell would erupt if he went outside and nobody else has come in and brought the stuff with them, and then you have to open the door and go hey, and bring everything back in again. So usually it meant there was a whole lot of men just standing outside of the freezing cold for a period of time, and then you give them a glass of whiskey and everyone's happy. But we used to do it throughout the family, and they used to all get together and they used to tell stories, and I suppose it's that kind of weird Gaelic thing, and they'd do the weird midnight mass if you were the Catholic family, which is what we didn't do. So when I dated this Catholic chap, we didn't do first footing because they were Catholics, and it was all very sure. They would go to midnight mass and do all the thing, and it was all very fancy, and we would just be standing outside and waiting to come in, and it was a bit of a conflict of kind of different sort of religions and different tribes almost. I reckon. It was all
really
a little
intense,
bit strange.
isn't it? Yeah.
It's but there was that whole, you didn't really do mass with the Methodists. We told stories.
I was a Methodist for
It
a
was-
short period, yes.
It was, and the Presbyterians are even worse. They're very hardcore, and everything's stripped back, and it's not very. There's that whole. It's almost because the idea of God. Because I was brought up in a Baptist school, so I've had a bit of them all, to be honest. But I still find churches like weirdly interesting. That kind of, that somebody's believed so much in something that they've created this great big structure, and it's really ornate, like York Cathedral and Durham Cathedral, and they're super beautiful, and there's this kind of almost ephemeral feeling to it, and it's that kind of this untouchable creature that you have no idea what it is. It's just there.
Something magical.
Yeah, it's more magical to me than kind of all-controlling. And that the Bible was always, because we were told Bible stories as children, and apparently I used to really enjoy them. So I always used to think of them as fairy stories.
Yeah, well, in a way, I think they are.
The loaves and the fishes, and the blind men, and it's that kind of the magical stories. And when you go into churches like the Church of England, the Catholic Church, and they're all very gilded, and they're beautiful, and it's almost like when you go into mosques. I went to the Blue Mosque in Istanbul. Beautiful. And it's all those beautiful carvings and paintings, and you look at it and you just think like, wow,
I'm just trying to think. There is a church somewhere. It's in Britain where they've been able to get all the white, what do you call it, lime wash off, and then refined all the beautiful drawings underneath. I'll have to have a look and see if I can remember where that is. But the pictures, the drawings are huge.
Yeah.
And really,
Stunning.
engaging, Yes, it's great.
So I don't know, fairy stories for me are just a little bit, well, any stories really. It just sort of engages the imagination, and for me, religion is just another version of that. I
feel the same.
It's almost it's if somebody created, I suppose it's like Harry Potter world, somebody's creating a visual representation of it in the real world rather than it being in your head, and it's, I feel like that's how it is with churches, to be honest. I'm not particularly religious, but there's moments of it that kind of almost take your breath away, or you can connect in some sort of way. You sort of understand it, in the same way you do with stories. That some stories really touch parts of you, that they really resonate with things that you've done or seen or how you're feeling at the time, and I think maybe that's why people engage with religion quite so much. But I do love a church, I'm not going to lie, and a graveyard. I'm a super fan of a graveyard. I like scoping around and reading the names, and there's like
listening to the owls.
Yeah, and they're all being a little bit creepy.
The shadows.
I became obsessed with the finding the skull and crossbones in Whitby. Because Whitby, big Dracula thing, and the skull and crossbones, which is like the pirate thing.
Yeah.
And they had it out for a really long time. But you have to hunt for it. You have to know where it is.
I don't know anything about that.
Do you not? There's I think there's two of them, and they were pirates. And they've been buried in the graveyard right at the top of the 199 steps.
Well, I do remember a few months ago in the spring we went to the cafe in the little museum in the park at the top of Whitby, and we had a boggle hob cake, and fantastic. I'll put a picture up of the boggle hob. And it's a bit like a rock cake, and they've got the exclusive recipe, but I think you might be able to.
But again, so we were talking about fairy tales that were passed down sort of verbally and then written, tidied up by the Brothers Grimm and Hans Christian Andersen. Recipes were done like that as well.
Yeah, I would imagine,
so there was this. We love digging up old recipes, and. Like the older the better, because my grandma, she wasn't a great cook. Granddad was the chef, but he used to do everything in huge quantities because he was a chef on a minesweeper. So he would do thousands and thousands of things rather than just a couple. And there was only 5 of them in the family, so you would never need the amount of stuff that he used to. And he wasn't able to sort of cut it down at all. He was rubbish at it. But he was a really, really good chef. And then on my dad's side, they were all bakers. They had their own shop in Middlesbrough. And this whole idea of sort of baking and passing the recipes down through the families. There was a lovely gentleman who lived across the road who sadly passed away, and he gave us all of his wife's recipes. She didn't have anyone to give it to.
What's happened to this? Because you did start like an illustrated
cookery book.
We
did, and then we'd sort of picked it up again during the pandemic when we weren't so very busy and sort of 100 miles a minute, and then it stalled because I felt that it wasn't quite. We were missing some parts of it, because it has to be, for me, it has to be a story as much as it is a cookery book.
Well, we could maybe have a look at doing some.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah.
But it was things like resurrecting the Yorkshire pudding recipe, which is a very, very old recipe.
Yeah.
And we unearthed the recipe for Yorkshire rascals, which is an Elizabethan recipe, but has been trademarked by another company, so we can't use the name.
No.
But it's essentially a scone-like recipe. But there's this.
Think what you could use. Let me think. instead of saying, you could say a fat rabbit, couldn't you?
A fat rabbit, the
Yeah.
Yorkshire fat rabbit.
And
That's a good idea. We should
Yeah.
call them fat rabbits.
Yeah.
But they had this little face on with the two Cherokees,
Yeah.
and it was made using kind of like the French did. You know, when they had the communal ovens, and you would take
Yeah.
your bread at the end of the day or your soup, and you'd have like those peasant dishes that were fairly simple because. I mean,
Didn't they do the baguettes or something? And then as
Yeah.
the oven was
Cooling
down,
down.
everybody used to...
Yeah, they used to wander
Shove
across,
everything.
and that's where you get the boulanger potatoes, which are the sliced potatoes in the it's like a stock, and you just sort of lob it in the oven and
Yeah.
it cooks itself.
Yeah,
But the French have all these fancy dishes because we think of them as fancy, but the English also have all the regional dishes that they have from
Well,
cakes and.
I read somewhere that in the Elizabethan period we were introducing restaurants, and we were kind of the first to do that. And our cooking was actually quite renowned in London, in the major centres. It was only gone completely downhill during the war, I think, when there was no food and everything. Because my father was always talking about food is fuel. Doesn't matter what it tastes like, it's fuel.
It keeps
And
you going,
I
it fills
think
you
it
up.
all went a bit pear-shaped then, didn't
Yeah,
it?
I think with the introduction of things like hardtack and whale meat and
Spam.
spam, very dark times for everybody, I think, quite frankly. Although there's some people, I remember spam at school, it's horrendous.
Yes.
They used to do spam fritters. Oh, good lord. I won't care, Ian loves spam fritters. Chefs have some very, very dark, horrible habits. And they tend not to eat nice food, when they're not working, because it's a bit like a busman's holiday. So they tend to eat beans on toast and spam fritters.
Oh dear.
And it's he loves them. I wouldn't care, and I think they taste horrendous. It's just all a little bit grim.
Really?
I suppose it's you brought up with these things. I was brought up with casseroles and like liver onions
Yes.
and very well cooked big meals that had vegetables, so we would have a full dinner almost every night, but we'd always sit down together and have food together, because that's what brought your family together, so you could discuss things and chat about your day and complain at each other, I guess. And
we've got a little flutter friend.
with a flapping thing.
A little flapping friend.
I don't know where he's come from, but he won't do very well down here, I don't think. No, he used to always sit down and chew the cud over food and sort of breaking bread together, I suppose, at the end of the day. We still do it. We still sit down every night and have dinner together. Even now with a small one, Tiny Pickle.
Yeah.
And she comes and she sits with us. She doesn't eat any food yet.
I really like the way that the French bring up their children. It's really table manners, and even from quite a young age when they go into the canteen, apparently infant school, it's quite formal, isn't it? The way they select their, I don't know, the starter or get their serviettes.
I think I've encountered some children, and it doesn't happen so much as you would like. I think because over food you get this connection and you gain memories with it, and you have, I mean, for me, I remember eating things with grandma and granddad, and that's just how it was. And there's a tendency now to try and keep children quiet with technology rather than engaging with them, and I think it's a vital part of our culture that we're sort of bypassing in some instances, not all instances, but that actually they don't get to try.
I don't know where that's come from.
I don't know, it's huge. It's like a pterodactyl. He's a big fella. You've got this tendency to sort of completely bypass an entire part of what we're about. And that storytelling and eating and everything put together is quite something. I remember it from being a child.
We were going to just cover a few more things. First of all, there are other artists that, apart from me, that have been featured here at the cafe. This is one of them, and the details of this lady is going to be placed below.
She's a lovely local lady. Deals in textiles called Fiona Peel.
Yeah, Fiona Peel. So there we are. Just lift that up again. And is there anything other you'd like to say about the artist here? Because you were saying that there's some others that you wanted.
We've got there's a couple of other people. So we are part of the Yorkshire Mark, which means that we use local produce to make our food. So we make everything from scratch here. But with that, we wanted to support local artists as well, because we've got walls. And as much as it's lovely to buy loads of artwork, actually it doesn't create a very comfortable surrounding having everything that's mass produced. So we'd made friends with Helen and some lovely other artists, and there's actually a secret one that we have upstairs. We have no idea who it is, and there's a company called the Cabbage Patch who supply them with us in a kind of secret format. It's all very cloak and dagger, and we get the pictures, and we don't know who the artist is, and, but it's repurposed artists, old work and old frames, so they turn them around and paint on top of them.
Yeah.
But we'd sort of approached, we haven't approached anybody, that's completely not a lie. Some people have approached us, and some people are inspired by us, very much in the way that you were with the rabbits. And,
I really enjoyed doing the rabbits.
The drawings of the stories behind them.
Yeah.
And other people have drawn pictures of the building and things that happen inside it.
Yeah.
And
we can show some of those.
Yeah, we've got some of those upstairs, and they're beautiful. Some of them are for sale and some of them aren't. Some of them have just been sent to us, and we've framed them and put them up and kind of gone, well, these are amazing. Way more talented than I could ever be. My talent was never in mine's floral based and not building based. I can draw a rabbit.
Are these yours, aren't they?
Yes, these are all ours. The original logo was drawn by me because I have a textile and surface design background, but it's
brilliant. Yeah, it's really good.
We just always thought that we would really like to support artists, whether they be musical or visual or textural, or doesn't really matter. We kind of, that, because I come from that background, we wanted to support people who were just as small as we were, just trying to make a living, and trying to get their ideas out there, because it is...
Yeah, speaking from experience, it's very difficult getting artworks out there. You go through periods where you're quite successful and you get a lot of stuff out, and then there's a lot of periods where you don't, and when you do get commissions, the money can be very good, but it's not necessarily enough to...
not a regular thing.
No, so I think a great many creative people are part-time. I mean, I was an occupational therapist as well as doing art therapy and my artwork as well, and you have to in order to pay the bills.
See, I was always terrified of becoming a full-time artist because I couldn't see how I would make enough to pay anything.
No.
So we and we've got other artists that work along with us, fibre artists that work part-time with us, and they're lovely, and they do commissions as well, and fashion-based people who make clothes, and because they can't make it just on their own, and we try and showcase those guys as well where we can. And
what was really bonkers for me is when I was at art college, it was very much in vogue to make really enormous oil paintings.
Oh yes.
And I was so pleased because one of my paintings was showcased at my college show in London in Islington, where the lecturers sat with all the information to promote. It was Coventry School of Art there, and somebody did want to buy it, but the actual logistics of getting a 12x6 painting out and where they was just not possible. So I learned very quickly you had to do much smaller. For the pure ease of them being able to.
Yeah, it was always very, very hard when you went from college. I was at Northern School of Art, used to be Cleveland College of Art and Design, and you went from being very creative and huge to realising that people didn't actually want anything that was that big, because in relative terms nobody lives in Castle Howard or a giant giant stately home. Most people don't live in places like that, and actually if they want it transferred you need it to be a lot smaller, and I think I've travelled a lot quite round the UK and to a lot of sort of bohemian places like Brighton and areas in London, and you get quite a lot of small artist collectives, and we've been quite good at it in the northeast. Musically we have been up until recently, but not so much for the visual arts, and that's been quite difficult because you can't really find an artist community where you would have shops and galleries and things all together, and definitely not in Great Ayton when we first arrived here. So we'd thought that actually having different artworks on display and being able to move it around and change it and maybe give a little bit of a nod to some people, or even a helping hand, that would be great. Even if it just helped them get their name out there, that's kind of where we came from on that one, because I knew how difficult it was, because I'd abandoned it completely.
I must admit that after a while I gave up trying to promote myself as an artist. I was more an art therapist, and in the end I just got so fed up as well, because some galleries were expecting such high amounts of commission, over 33%, and I just felt that it was much more easier to make it for my own pleasure and then occasionally sell work, which I have done. Yeah. And in the end, I have to say I gave away a lot of my artwork. In the end, a lot's gone to charity. I did, for my master's degree, I did a lot of large fresco pieces that were on like panels, and I decided in the end that I really had fed up with trying to keep them, space for them, and I was quite amazed at the charities. Oh yes, we'll have them, almost biting my hands to get them, and I thought, well, great, I'm really pleased with that. If it goes to charity and it does end up on somebody's wall, I mean, that's fine. I put plenty of details on the back as to what it was.
But it's just, I think people, they forget how long it takes to make something or create something, or the thought process that goes into it, and
it is an awful lot.
Yeah, and it is. They assume, and it's very much the same with. I want to call it artisan, and there's I hate calling anything artisan because it's not. It's not really. We're just using techniques and things that perhaps are a little bit old-fashioned now. When you have the technology and you have the ability to use things that take the time away from it, or the effort away from it. You don't necessarily need to have, even in the world of artists, you don't need to have the talent anymore. You've got things that will do it for you. And I think that's very much the same with chefs. And the very old school chefs will know how to poach an egg properly and know how to cook scone, but now you can buy ovens that will inject the right amount of moisture, and there's some fancy back work, and we could never afford it because we're not millionaires, so we have an oven, just a regular oven. It has on and off and a temperature gauge, and that's it. The big German ovens have temperature probes, they can clean themselves, they talk to the internet, they're very, very complex, and a lot of chefs have these now, so it kind of takes that element of
creativity.
You're not, from my experience, I've been doing this for 20 odd years, when I first started, a chef was a chef, and then you have to cook a scone and make a quiche, and then you have to poach salmon, and it wasn't about probes and technology, it was about that knowledge, and you'd have gone through the training, and it was very specific, and you went through years of cookery school and all of the other stuff that came with it, and you specialised, you were pastry or you were restaurant based, and
I remember art college, certainly on the foundation course, we did hours and hours and hours and hours of drawing.
Yeah.
Until you could actually draw. And some of the drawing modules were very difficult indeed. Like an engineering style drawing where you were given a piece of, I don't know, a metal component, and you were told to imagine yourself being this big inside, and then drawing the interior from the point of view of this tiny human inside. It was absolute nightmare, but it really toughened you up. And also, I don't help myself in that my work, like this behind person here, it's all mixed media, and it very often doesn't photograph very well. It's the whole thing is designed to change or move depending on what lighting conditions it's in, and the textures are from multiple angles.
Yeah.
So this doesn't work digitally at all.
No, it's something you very much have to see in person, and it's when I went to art college, we did you went through the foundation year and you do all of the modules to try and see which area you're most interested in, because I was always interested in texture, so all of my work tended to be mixed media, and it was horrific. And we got different questions, because you do art college, you get questions that you have to answer in the form of visually, and it can be anything. And I remember doing this great big piece of parchment, which was this huge poem that I'd handwritten out and then burnt all the edges and then added things to it. It was all very, very fancy, but you couldn't display it because it was completely ridiculous. And then you have to...
I've done installations somewhat. I did do an installation, like a walk-in installation, when I was working with disabled people, and it was fabulous because they really, really enjoyed doing it, and they wrecked it in the end because they used it so much.
Yeah.
And I think the ephemeral enjoyment, I think, goes against what people think is art is more now. It's for investing huge amounts of money in, isn't it?
But I think people assume that because it's art, and whether it's fibre art or it's flat art so I trained as an embroiderer, which is you didn't have to do anything on a huge scale, but it was quite fun if you did. And you've got these misconceptions about what art is and the kind of creative industries that it come from, and how it's not worth an awful lot of money, but they're usually people who've never spent any time doing it. So it takes a really long time to get to the point where you can visualize something and then make it happen. It's not as easy a process if it just suddenly appears. There's usually a lot of trial and error in giant pieces, and and ruining everything, and then having to start again, and
exactly.
It's not a hobby.
You've got to fail, I think. I always used to think when I was doing a painting, it's a bit like throwing yourself off a cliff like Icarus and hoping to fly, and sometimes you do, and I used to find that it was fail, and you're getting further and further up, and then for a short period you had this almost divine muse feeling when everything worked. And you didn't know how you were doing that, no idea, and then eventually this would fade off again, and you'd be back down the bottom, so it was be climbing the cliff face again.
I remember a project, it was my last year at Newcastle College, because it was at a time when you could do higher national diplomas, and I went from art college to higher national diploma to a degree, and in kind of weird steps that I ended up, because art school's a bit of an odd one, because you do things in very odd ways, and I remember one of my final projects, and I've always been obsessed with the texture of memory and how you collect things, and how this has kind of gone through history, and how things like wedding dresses and christening dresses and quilts have always been sort of tied up with memories and families, and you keep things and pass them down. And there's quite a lot written on it, and one of my final projects was about the texture of memory, and I made tiny people out of old clothes and things that I'd found, and sort of told a story through these little humans that I'd made. And I'd got into a really good place, and I'd made one of these, and it took hours to make these tiny people, because they were all made, hand dyed all the silk, and made their hair out of wool and all sorts of other bits and bobs. A little bit like, I don't know whether you can remember the Comfort adverts, where they had these, and it was all animated too, none of it was real, but they were made out of fabric, these people in various different settings, kind of skipping through, and they were okay because they'd been moisturised by Comfort. And so they were kind of in the style of that, but these little people that were made, and it was placed to the lyrics of a song by David Gray called Shine. It's how you move from one aspect of your life to another, and you leave things behind, and you take some things with you, but you leave things around, and you kind of rise from the ashes like a bird of flame, which is one of the song lyrics. And so it was the idea of these little humans that almost real, that are made of fabric, and the fabric of their past, and they kind of take it along. They had little elements that they'd sort of brought, like watches and things that they'd collected, and had this.
Like this here.
Yeah, so this is my little bumblebee. So this is made by a local artist called Kettle of Fish. She's a lovely lady. She's a gardener as well, and she has Kettle of Fish designs, and she makes these little beautiful things out of bits that she's found, and they're just so textural and interesting to touch, and that was kind of where I'd come from with these little humans. And I started off on a really good. I've still got them. Yeah. I started on a really good tangent, and then kind of went. I made one of them, and then it started on another one, and I think I've still got part of one of the ones that I was making, where I've just got the head and the torso, where I'd gone, oh, sod it. I think it's all gone out the window. I haven't, like, the first rush of creativity, I think, and you get really into it, and it's like, I'd be up until 3-4 o'clock in the morning hand stitching things, and putting beads onto stuff, and sewing and embroidering and building these ideas, and then it all fits into place, and then it doesn't, and you're not entirely sure quite how it unravelled itself.
I know, I've been there.
But it's people just assume that it's just, you can just it together and it just automatically. No. And it's not. It's hours and hours and hours of thinking and manipulating and trying and failing, and we do it quite a lot with recipes. There's so many cakes that we ruin, and I've never been trained in the world of chefing, not like Ian has. Ian's had years of training, and I'm a little bit slapdash, but I tend to do the cake side of stuff. I couldn't do what he does because it's far too stressful, and for me it's still a little bit of fun. It's not serious, so if it doesn't really work out, then it's all right. I don't know how many banana breads I've burnt or undercooked, or burnt the outside and the inside's raw, but it's all about trying it, and eventually you come out with a product that's usable. But a lot of the time
certainly when I was on my foundation course, I remember a lovely man, Tom Wall, who sadly has passed away quite a few years ago. He was the guy that believed in me when I went in so I went into art college in my early 30s. I was working in a bank, a bit like who's the guy that left working in bank? Degas, wasn't it?
Oh yeah.
And anyway, I had this rubbish sketchbook with hardly anything in it, and he believed in me to enough to give me a place. And he was saying that in order to get a really good drawing, and then maybe 3 or 4 excellent drawings, you need to do 100.
Yeah.
And then the vast majority of those go in the dustbin.
Yeah.
But unless you do the stuff that ends up in the dustbin, where you're really pushing and trying to develop something, you ain't going to get your top 5.
No, that's true. You do end up with an awful lot of waste before you get.
Failure is incredibly important.
Yeah.
Experimentation and not being afraid to really, as I say, as I was talking about earlier about jumping off the cliff with your wings and trying to fly and then crash landing. Yeah.
And there's so many times we've made mistakes with food. Myself with various projects that we've I've started at art college and at art school, and you have this idea and it just doesn't quite work, and you can't, there's something and won't quite stick together.
As we were talking earlier, that's why I quite like the set of 4 little rabbit pictures I did for you, where I've got the one where it's upside down. Oh no, it's cake up, and it's got a little label at the bottom referencing Tommy Cooper, which I just love, because the top hat's the wrong way up, so he's not coming out of the hat, he's falling. I mean, that's life, isn't it? And didn't he do a tremendous job of making us laugh though with it going wrong? It's and of course the hat jokes, I mean, I love the story and then standing and then getting it wrong. I love that. He gets into the story, and he has to hang on a minute and go back and then put the hats on again to catch up. It's great, genius. It's
but another great storyteller. He was absolutely fantastic. It's all memories from my childhood. My dad was a huge fan of Tommy.
Yeah, he used to.
He did actually look a little bit like him. He had the big hairy eyebrows, and he was.
The fez.
Yeah, he was. He
had a fez.
He did. He was, and he looked a little bit like him. He was. I don't know whether it was men of that era. It was very cool to look like that. But he had the big bushy eyebrows, and he had quite a prominent nose. My father. Yeah. But he was quite a storyteller as well. He loved telling stories from when he was in the army and. When he was working on ships and doing various things, and he was fantastic storyteller. Didn't like reading stories, but he liked telling them. He was good at that.
You can elaborate and you can go off on tangents, can't you?
Whereas my mother was never very much of a storyteller. She would read the stories, but she wouldn't ever create them. And I think with my father. So again, it's all about memory for me, because we would spend days out at the beach, and the odd things that you would do with your parents and siblings as a child, and it was predominantly with my father, not with my mother. She was very much about reading other people's stories and telling those stories rather than her own. Whereas the stories my father used to tell were fantastic, and none of them were true. Obviously, they were all full of hyperbole and completely outrageous. There's a lovely film actually called Big Fish by Baz Luhrmann.
Oh yes.
And it stars Ewan McGregor, and it's about a son and his father, and his father's a bit on his last legs, and he's told all these stories, and the son doesn't get along with him because he just thinks he's just full of bull, and he's always telling these stories and they're ridiculous, and he just wishes he was a proper dad. And actually he realises these stories are a way of imparting kind of knowledge and telling him about his life in an interesting way. And then although there's a little bit of kind of make-believe and a little bit of exaggeration, that 90% of the stories are actually true. They're just a little bit slightly off to make them more interesting to children. I remember my father telling me that he was in the greatest melon eating championships. And he'd won. And he was the fastest melon eater in the UK.
I've been down to see Jerusalem at the beginning of this month, July.
Oh, yes.
And it really reminds me of the Mark Rylance character, Johnny Rooster Byron, which is the previous vlog which I've done to this one. And he's a tremendous storyteller. He tells stories where he's seen giants, and he has this friend called Ginger who's played by Mackenzie Crook, from Pirates of the Caribbean. And Ginger's always trying to catch him out and saying, and how tall was this giant? And it's very, very similar things, very much connected to the landscape and this idea of the mysticism of England, something quite anarchic, chaotic, but very precious, that we do well not to smother or knock out, because Johnny Rooster, as I've said, is is quite a naughty boy in that he sells whiz and all the rest of it. But the young woman Phaedra, who sings Jerusalem, the hymn, beautifully at the beginning, she's being abused by her stepfather, and it's Johnny who's hiding her in the caravan. And at the end of the play, I'm sorry, I'm spoiling this for you, but it's sold out anyway, the play. And
You can't see it.
He gets dreadfully beaten up by her father, because he actually has the guts to protect her. So yeah, it was really, quite
I'll see if I can try and see that one.
Mm.
But I understand what they mean about the sort of English, this mysticism, this sort of this weird fairy stories, and all of the background that kind of comes with it, and it's you get sucked into it, and it's this history almost completely untouchable, and part of you makes you want to put on a rucksack and go marching across the country to try and find these places and to relive it all, and it's almost a little bit sad that you can't see dragons and
well, you can see mystical white figures carved into the chalk, and you can go to these various stone circles, or in Cornwall there's this strange stone plinths on. I've forgotten what they're called. So there are places where you can go and make things up.
It's almost I don't know. For me, it's a little bit like you look to the past to sort of make sense of who you are, whether it's through fairy stories or through mythological tales or religion, or even for us it's through sort of recipe stories, because often the recipe we get it's accompanied by some sort of a story, sort of this grandmother baked this on this date, and there's always a story behind a recipe. It's not just it just turned up and that was the end of it. It evolves, and it gathers speed like a fairy story, and it changes and becomes something else. And it amalgamates with something, and it becomes the thing that you have in front of you, or that you believe, or you read now. But I think there's that kind of. I was telling Helen earlier, my mum used to read me The Hobbit as a 4-year-old. A very interesting bedtime story. But I'd always had in my mind that we'd go off and find Hobbiton with a handkerchief on a stick, and it's that imagination, and that it just kind of brings everything together, and you look to all of that to find out who you are now, I find, and it sort of makes sense a bit of who you are, and where you've come from, and sort of guides you to where you're planning on going. For me it does. I mean, some people, I'm guessing, it doesn't, and they don't really like recipes or fairy tales or any of that nonsense, but it's a little bit of escapism, isn't it?
Yes.
I think sometimes the world is a little bit grim.
Oh, definitely.
And I mean, some of it, we were talking earlier about the German fairy tales and how dark they very are,
and how I would say that the Germans have got a kind of research body of work that's been collected over a long period of time, and it's been shown just how incredibly old a lot of fairy stories are. We're going back, maybe even as far as the Neolithic to verbal stories, because of course Brothers Grimm and Hans Christian Andersen went around collecting fairy stories, and they very often were fragmentary with very unsatisfactory endings or bizarre dreamlike stories, and they collected ones on a similar theme, tidy them all up.
Oh, I remember an English teacher telling me not to end a story with, and then I woke up and it was all a dream. That was the secondary school one. But it's in the same way that we would have recipes, so stories and recipes are handed down verbally, they're not necessarily written down, so they change and they warp, and you were telling me that they'd gathered all these stories together and sort of made them readable and a little bit more accessible to everybody,
Yes.
rather than it just being a verbalised thing.
Because they're not necessarily at all pleasant. Some of them are quite nightmarish, and I think designed much more for adults than children.
Yes.
Especially small children.
It's terrorised. Well, the Germans have a lot of strange traditions. There's the Christmas one. A friend of mine lived in Germany with her parents for a while, and it's like the Krampus thing, which is terrifying. So in Whitby they do the Krampus every Christmas, so the anti-Christmas, and this creature comes out of the sea.
Oh.
And if you've not seen it,
No.
I'll have to tell you when it's on. So everybody flocks to Whitby because they do full Krampus, and
wow.
this creature, this hideous devil-like creature with long hair and hideous skin, and this great big staff comes out of the sea with his devils, and if you've been a naughty child then you get carted off. My friend who lived in Germany had a similar thing. You leave your shoes out, because the Christmas in Germany lasts for quite a long time. They celebrate it all the way through, and you leave your shoes out, and if you'd been good you'd have it filled with presents, and if you'd been bad you'd have it filled with coal, but then you'd be at the risk of being taken away by Krampus. So there's the slight terror of Christmas time as a child, of being kidnapped by some sort of otherworldly creature, and possibly eaten, who knows. But if you ever have time, the Krampus celebrations happen.
I think I'll have to look up on that.
It's very, very dark, but it's quite. There's a lady who works with us here. She takes her children, and I think it's all in the name of good fun. So there's nothing of it is serious, and then she lets them know that they're not going to be eaten just before Christmas.
Right.
But it's that kind of traditional sort of German thing, where there's going to be an evil creature that comes and gobbles you whole if you don't behave yourself.
Right.
And that's where the German stories are a little bit terrifying.
Must have had a lot of very misbehaving children.
Yes, and they needed gobbling. Imminently, no presents for you, you're just going to get eaten. But yeah, the English ones are a little bit easier going, slightly less. I suppose it's like the witches and Hansel and Gretel, because the witch was going to eat Hansel and Gretel.
Oh yes, that's right.
It's you forget that there's some really dark parts to some of those stories. It isn't all sort of all fairy and there's a happy ending, and again I think the storybook that I had with it as a child, it was Thumbelina, who ended very badly for her, and the Little Mermaid didn't get married. She went back.
Painful, wasn't it?
Yeah,
environment.
She went back to the sea, and it ended very badly for her. And it wasn't all bright colours and singing songs.
No.
It was all a little bit horrendous.
That's what I like about the rabbit, actually, because he always seems to be really quite perky, and
yes,
he rather reminds me of Trickster rabbit.
Yes,
and I really love that, because Bugs Bunny is another version of Trickster Rabbit, which I think originates from the Pedlo Indians.
Oh yes.
And when they were trying to be converted to Christianity, they didn't want to give up Trickster Rabbit. Why would we want Jesus when we've got Trickster Rabbit?
Why would you?
And I actually think that the last James Bond film, where he dies, is a massive mistake, because Jamie Bond is Britain's Trickster Rabbit. I mean, he's always helping everybody, isn't it? And you know, the Trickster Rabbit, to kill off your cultural hero who's funny and always wiggles out problems, this is a massive mistake.
Yes, you don't do that generally.
No, you don't.
But our rabbit is always full of mischief and generally everywhere. But no, you don't love James Bond.
No.
I don't think he's dead, really.
No.
So
No. Right, thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it. I always do enjoy the scones, and it's lovely just chatting to Kirstine, who's always so full of the latest news and what she's been up to. And I think you could do stand up because you're really good at telling stories. I love that. So.
I quite like. I like to tell a story. If you want a story, I've definitely got one. Thank you, Helen.
Anyway, thank you. and I hope you've enjoyed watching, and please tune in for next time when I'm not quite sure what I shall do, but it'll be another story, I'm sure. Bye for now.